and send him off. Bye, Ivan. We're starting again. All right. Yeah, I know. Let the crowd be joyous. All right, we're going to try and tackle some of the pain points. These are probably from a previous session. We didn't really get anything material at the pain points for transport. Like I said, we'll make sure they get routed to the correct work group and acted on as quickly as possible. But transport does have some outstanding previous business that we need to address. Do you want to go first, or is it rate limit?
I would like to just address a couple of the issues that came up that are more or less transport, right? Okay. So there was one case where there was a comment about, and I forget who did these, sorry about that, but strictness is possibly holding us back, and basically with string fields as enumerations. I'm thinking about that one because they were having issues sort of keeping old, like a field that in the past was a string and now they want it to be an enumeration, and they weren't sure how to deal with that. I think we actually have that solved already, because I believe that you could do that with implementing the lookup resource and then changing your data type from enum to a string, and then just having it validated by the annotation that you could put on the field saying that this string field is now validated by a specific lookup. So I think that one's solved, unless I didn't fully get what they were after, but I think so. We got that one nailed. So any comments, thoughts on that one?
A question from the floor was, how would we document the issue for those people with the solution for the issue for those people with the pain?
We have been talking about best practice kind of document.
Yes. So I think it's one of the guides
we could do.
Should be coming out that would have some bearing on that. It's a good point. Was there another one?
There is one more.
Okay.
So one person said they were failing certification on old fields or old lookups because they were either the field was sounding like an old field and they were getting flagged for that, or the lookup's no longer valid, or it sounds like another lookup. And my thought on that one was we could, if those fields are deprecated, they could mark them deprecated in their field metadata, because now we have the fields metadata coming out. And we could have certification not fail them for any field that sounds like or is old. And as long as it's marked as deprecated. That way we know they're not going to get a new one. Paul?
Question from the floor was, is it the deprecated field name, or is it that the data in the field is bad from being an old record? And I know that I've heard people tell me about that in the past 2 days, where it's a challenge when the data is bad from 8 years ago and nobody's going to go and fix that, or nobody has the time to go fix that. So that was the question.
Right. So if it's a lookup, I think we can definitely do it with the deprecated thing. But if it's like a number and it's out of range, or
right. There's no, excuse me. There's no way for the question or the comment on the floor is there's no way now to say that a bad record that has potentially bad data or a mismatch of type can be excluded from being tested in certification. And there needs to be some kind of mechanism that says, we know we've got old data. It is what it is. It's not going to get fixed. I'm not updating 10,000 records because they had a string type that should be numeric.
That's fair. I wrote that one down to something to follow up on another.
So the comment on the floor is, from a data consumer perspective, that's not good, because it means he has to write special code to deal with the exceptions on records that he might pick up in a normal query. Is that fair? Okay, perfect.
But would it not help if there was a field in the record that said it was old and non-compliant, and read at your own risk? Yes.
An annotation on it.
Or an annotation, sure.
I heard you say annotation before. Was that for something else?
That was for the lookup.
Okay.
But either works.
Right. Comment on the floor was, First comment was that might work. You'd have to think about some sort of annotation to say it's deprecated. It probably still needs special handling. The second comment on the floor was sometimes these are 5 systems ago. You can't even really change it. It's basically an historic record, and it will still cause problems, but it's 10 or more years old. Yeah, maybe just discard the records if they're that bad. Maybe I don't have a solution to that, but those are good comments. And the challenge, right? I mean, that's the whole challenge of our standards. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thanks, Sam. A whole challenge of our standards is we have conflicting requirements, conflicting needs. As a data consumer myself, I hate having to write special case code because it always happens on a Friday morning and you have to have it fixed before the weekend, and it's just dreadful. I'll get back to you, Bill. We have a question right over here. Okay, I'll reiterate the comment from the floor and then get to you, Bill. MLS staff have a fiduciary duty and liability if they modify agent input data, and so the general policy is just leave it alone, and always flag me if I summarize your comment incorrectly, so I'm trying to be succinct. So liability issues can result in data being, it is what it is, because that's how it went in. Back to Bill. Yeah, so the comment was exclude those types of values from the feed, so downstream consumers, data consumers don't have to deal with it. So that's another interesting point. I'm sure we'll have all kinds of fun figuring that one out.
I'm getting all this
But it's a good point. That's a really good point. And it goes back to the, oh, thank you, deprecation comments about, maybe there's somewhere we can say these fields, you should probably not test them for certification. You probably not consume them for data consumer unless you have specific handlers for them. We had a question over here. Oh, sorry. You're completely invisible, Jeff. You're going to have to move if you want me to see you. That's a fair point. Did I just hear you say we should model things correctly and it go as a collection on the property and not a listing? Oh, that's a terrible idea. We should not do that, ever. I think we need a better data model. It's not going to ever happen, but maybe there's a way to handle the bad records. The comment was maybe we can handle bad records as a collection on the property. I was making a small joke about the fact at the field level. Okay. Okay, on individual fields that don't comply with the metadata, a collection. Right, so separating out deprecated fields into a collection, and then you still get most of the record information, and then you can process the collection of deprecated fields separately if you want to, but you can still get the main thrust of it. Comment over there. I misunderstood. Okay, yeah. And I thought he was going to let me do an excellent data model that separates out listings and properties so that we can, only change the stuff that changes, but that's not happening. Oh, Sam's now has microphones. Two-fisted microphone guy.
I will add too, maybe we should do some informational guidance for MLSs, because what information the agent puts in and the broker puts in the listing, that's an important thing. The API is a transformation. At the end of the day, it is an interface, a transformation. So what data fields and what data types we use in the API, it's straightforward. There is a set of rules. That's what the standard is. So we could probably work on the difference between what's in those fields that the agents created, and the existence of an API is that we change sometimes the data types, the field names, because that's what it's there for. So we could work on that.
Or hide the data like it was previously said.
All right.
I don't have a question. I was just going to help him run mics.
Oh, thank you very much. We always appreciate people volunteering to help out. And that's not being funny, that's the truth. Any other questions or comments that you have, Sergio? You were reading off a list from pain points. We went on a fairly...
Through those.
Okay.
And, I'm just taking notes on the rest of the stuff.
All right, then let's let's move on to one that I know is still out there and has, again, conflicting requirements. Rate limiting. Many people have problems today figuring out what rate limiting is at the vendor source system level. I need to pull records. I don't know if I can pull 1,000 an hour, 1,000 a day, 1,000 a minute. The only way I ever discover this is when I get blocked. And sometimes the blocking is reasonable, and I can get an HTTP 429, and it's got a retry header, retry after header, and I can figure out how to make that happen. But most of the time, it just kicks me off, and it's frustrating, and that is contrasted against we're all using so much web infrastructure right now, cloud infrastructure, that we have no control over how they rate limit us. They're there to protect us from people making bad queries, doing things that are ridiculous, or plain old distributed denial of service. So we don't actually always control the way that rate limiting happens. But I think we can probably come up with a way to have a standard way of saying, here's what we hope the rate limit is. If you stay under these numbers, you will probably be okay most of the time. You'll still get caught with your CDN. You'll still get caught with the WAF you put in front of things that doesn't tell you anything about what's going on purpose. But we might be able to at least say, generally speaking, you can pull anything that just has keys as much as you want, anything that is around 1,000 an hour is fine, something like that, some way of advertising. I'm glad you're back, Joseph, because we're talking about rate limiting. Yeah. Oh, he's leaving now? Yeah, no. Yeah, okay. And some vendors are already figuring out ways to advertise this so that people can at least have an idea of how to tackle this. It's usually worse. The case is the extreme case is I'm initializing against the system for the first time. I need 3 years of records on solds, and I need to pull a lot because this is a big system. It's got hundreds of thousands of records I need to pull, and if I'm rate limited to 1,000 a day, I'm never going to catch up with the system. So that's the extreme case. We're trying to address initialization separately from some of the parts of the standards, not having to run that type of thing through the Web API interface. But we don't have a current solution, and some clients will have a lot of traffic, and they need to probably know what they should be able to expect in normal operation, not the extreme case. So maybe we can find a standard way to advertise what sort of things you should be doing with your system to be a good customer to the upstream source. I think I summarized that well.
Yeah, and to just elaborate a little on the reason we're being a little bit wishy-washy on whether we're going to put an actual number out there is that web application firewalls and some of the systems in front of your servers will limit these, and they don't tell you exactly how those limits are. Definitely that aspect that makes this a lot more. Oh, wow, amazing.
Come and stand here.
Okay, I'll try that again. A lot of systems have web application firewalls in front of them and other systems to protect against DDoS attacks that don't necessarily advertise limits in a very accurate way, so that it's very hard to specify what those are. And that's why this makes it a little more difficult. We can't just throw out there an exact number, and that's why we're asking for kind of feedback on how we might want to enforce these things, even though we don't actually know what some of the front-end systems will throttle against. But those are usually very high, so I don't think that's going to be a huge issue in general.
So just for clarity, is this rate limiting on the provider, like the cloud providers, or is this rate limiting on the API software itself?
There's both going on. So there is rate limiting at most vendors. Not all vendors rate limit on all types of requests, but some vendors have very low limits, and most cloud infrastructure have very high limits. But occasionally they bump into each other, like system initialization, where you're trying to do a lot of records at once, can trigger both your internal rate limits and external rate limits. And the external rate limits you have zero control over. Like you just, on purpose, they do not tell you what they're going to do. They have algorithms that run under the cover because they're supposed to be protecting you. You're paying money for them to prevent, spam bots from shutting you down. They don't tell you what's going on. And I've had this problem before. It's very frustrating from both sides because it just stopped working and nobody's getting the data that said, no log files are saying, well, you did this kind of query and that triggers my algorithm. And it's like, well, but that's what we do all day. What's going on? So it's very challenging from that perspective. Did that roughly answer your question?
Yeah.
Wishy-washy, I know. It's a hard problem.
It's hard, but it goes back to whoever's providing the service or building the API should query their cloud provider for some sort of metrics and provide that in the header of the request. So anytime you're making an API request, you could look at the header. It will help and have some sort of ID, what you just pull, how much, maybe the remaining pull per minute, per hour, per 24 hours. And that could solve some of the problem, but cloud providers can't help that.
Joseph's also added a number of good comments on the discussion that's out there around this, and I think you'd like to say something.
Yeah, so initially we would pass the 429 error back, and we discovered no one paid attention to it. Instead, what we saw was an influx of emails into our support team saying, we don't have access, something's broken, why are you down? We turned that into, okay, we will, if we have to rate limit you or shut you off for any reason. Before we get to that point, we'll send you a warning email, okay? And that warning email will describe what's going on, and we're going to send it to the primary contact email address on the account. That still did nothing, okay? Then we started and went to the point where we just email you every hour now, something to that extent, telling you where you're at. That still wasn't helping. And then finally, because we got enough feedback that, well, can you send us the logs of what we're doing to you? Because we don't actually keep our own logs. We actually started keeping logs for the data consumers so they knew what was going on and built a dashboard for them that they can go into their account and see at any given moment. And beyond that, on an hour-by-hour basis, we'll highlight it yellow or red into where you are in that range. And if you click on it, that hour period, you'll get the logs for that period, and we'll highlight what was suspect or what was problematic. Even with all of that, I will tell you, we routinely end up rate limiting 20, 30 folks a day. The hardest part is not our communication, it's the receptiveness of the communication we're putting out and taking advantage of all the different ways we're trying to communicate that information. So, to Sunil's gun, passing that in the header would be great. I agree. But then the problem is are they listening? We're speaking, but are they hearing us? So.
Right. This is a really complex problem.
It goes back to the consumer. You have to build, if you're building a service, build it properly. Look at their tools out there. For example, in .NET, you have Poly. And Poly gives you a resilient client. And with that client, you could react. You could interrogate the header every time it's come back. If it's a 429, you look at the header. And it could do all kind of, give you all kind of statistic about your requests.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think the people we're trying to address, and in Joseph's case, I'm almost certain it is, they don't show up to these meetings. They're not online right now. They're just not here. And I would expect everyone in this room to at least make a good attempt at being a good client and would listen to 429 headers, would listen to, you phone up and say, hey, what's going on? Oh, you're hitting us too hard. Oh, well, here's why I need to hit you. know that you can't do that, or, oh, we understand it's for 1 week, you need to sync up some data. Hey, we'll change some limits and you can pull that, but we're putting them back on again because developers make mistakes. Oops, I just did a loop and I'm calling you every 12 seconds. Bill.
So, I mean, the problem with the 429 error is that we still don't understand why we got throttled. And so Joe's done a great job, his reporting, and we do a lot of MLSs with him, and every time we add more MLSs, he raises our limit just a little bit more because we're hitting that same URL. Trestle has a similar concept. As they get more counts signed on board, they raise that. Some of the vendors, there are magic numbers. We don't understand why. We do get some, the 429 errors. I think just really communicating what those throttles are and the methodology on how you can get them increased would help greatly.
And my observation is that there's also some people who are living in the past and not really recognizing, changing dynamic of growing companies, changing things like that, and they've got hard limits, and it's like, that's the way it is. You can only pull this much. Well, I've tripled my client base, and each client is calling to you to pull some data. Or I have to sync up faster because my clients are demanding that. I think some people need to hear the message that this is complex and you can't just set one rate limit fits everybody. You can't tell them more than a 429 because most people will try and take some action to make the 429 never happen again because I want the data, I need it to run my business. So I think we maybe need to think about maybe writing a guide around managing rate limits and how do you protect yourself against careless programming. We'll probably quote exclusively or extensively from Joseph's comments because it sounds like he's really built a good system around being sensitive to the nature of the community. We've got experts and then people not so expert, but still allowing his system to work correctly. I think it's a lot of good feedback. And
I think the server vendors also need some bit of responsibility there in terms of making the rate limits high enough to deal with the size of data that they have, that your initialization requests, and if you happen to update 100,000 listings, oops, in the last 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, and that was a backfill issue that we were talking about yesterday was quite often source providers will often have, hey, I have to update my database version, I'm doing it now. It's going to cause a change on 100,000 records, 1 million records. It happens once a year, but if that happens and I'm the downstream consumer of this, I suddenly have 1 million records that changed. I need to pull those records. How do I get them done? Well, maybe there's some things we could do with maybe backfilling, allowing backfills, which is, hey, we've got all these records, they're going to change. This field type's going to have to change because it's a problem. Some way to help identify that. It's a complex problem. I just don't see a quick and simple solution that will fit all cases. But maybe we can do something with things like the million row timestamp changes because they had to do something that's required. Yeah. Oh, Jeff.
So
Thank you.
I think we kind of need to break this problem down into two cases because people keep arguing one side or the other. That we've got the bad consumer and we have the bad producer problem. On the consumer side, we've got cases where we return, denied 401 errors unauthorized on login, and they literally hit us 60 times a second. It doesn't matter what we put in the payload, there's bad consumers. And that's, what the server sides are using rate limits for. I mean, there's the communication side of it, but, as was mentioned before, there's a lot of people that aren't reading what's in there. We put the, even just the basic retry after, please wait an hour stuff, and you're sitting them sit there and hit it, getting 429s for an hour before they come back. And that's just a bad consumer. So I think when we come to doing the best practices guide, we should do it from a consumer perspective and a producer perspective. On the producer side, coming up with, the simple spreadsheet that says, if you're modifying X number of records in your system per hour, and you've got, this and this and this, here's the math, this is what the number should at least be, kind of thing. And then here's an example of a high water mark when everything gets touched in that. So they get an idea of where the rate limits really should be, because like you said, some of them are just hard limits that have been pulled out of the air based on data 10 or 15 years ago. And they're now aggregating a lot more data. And that's what, but the numbers never moved up and things like that.
Complex. But we'll try and come up with a solution that at least gives some guidance to the community about how you should behave, what your expectations should be. Again, as I mentioned, that's going to be a challenge because the people in this room, I think, pretty much entirely understand the problem and the desire to be a good client, be a good server. It's the people who are not in this room that we have to figure out how to get to read the guide, to understand what's going to happen. Some of that might fall onto the data providers, whether that's an MLS or an aggregator, to push out, you have to read this guide, you have to go look here. And if you can do those two things, then we can do something about it. Is there a third rail I could touch here, Sam? I think I'm going to touch it because it feels right. Maybe client certification is a thing that needs to be brought up again. Many years ago, there was client certification, which was
a lot of
very,
applause for the folks on the live stream.
yeah, very difficult to do. However, when you got certified, everybody who you started to talk to was like, oh, you've been certified. Well, okay, I do not have to handhold you. I can now have some confidence that you know how to behave and that I can let you touch my system without worrying about whether you're going to clobber me. So, pardon?
We're going to charge certified clients less.
Oh, yeah, maybe. That would be a real incentive to get certified, right? Like, I thought you were leaving. You're leaving in the middle. Never mind. I remember now.
No pricing conversations, please.
But it was a thing that was done. I see Bill there. It was a thing that was done that did give some confidence to MLSs and vendors that this person at least had tried to behave correctly. Bill. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hey, Dan Ray. One of my last acts before I left CoreLogic, when I was the leader on Trestle, was to look into this question of how informed our consumers are. And just as a stab at that, I searched up how many of my consumer clients had pulled the metadata in the last 90 days. And there'd been 2 changes since then. Any guess?
1.
It's 2%.
2?
2% of the consumers had pulled the metadata in the last 90 days.
Wow.
Right? So just to underline, like, there is a vast data consumer contingent out there that has no clue how it's done well. And I don't know how RESO deals with that. I should have said this in pain points maybe. I feel like we're back at pain points, but there's got to be some kind of education outreach that the aggregators do. Maybe, I don't know what the answer is, but boy, there's a lot of people out there doing it wrong.
So maybe this feeds into what's going on with Red T.
Yeah.
And that is a step towards certification that can be helpful.
Yeah.
Do you have any Red T people? Make sure that the program is sufficient to have that level of confidence that we know the people who've passed that have at least understood, have read the information, understand you're supposed to pull metadata probably every day, because I don't know when you guys are changing it necessarily, and compare it against, we were talking about checksums somewhere for media earlier today, and I've never met a checksum I don't like, because if I can compare checksums, I pull the new checksum, I checksum my media, and it matches, I don't have to pull it, right? Like it's the same photo. Maybe this Red T can help provide a level of confidence that at least you need to pull the metadata because you never know when it's going to change. It may not affect your system at all, a metadata change, but you got to look. So that could feed right into the program and help build that confidence, because client certification is difficult. It is a hard problem to solve because it's all over the map, and you have to be able to go from the extreme case where they're able to pull, 30 years of data and do something useful with it, to I'm in the basement, I'm the nephew of the realtor, and I'm building a website for them and I'm just doing my best. And there's that whole gamut of people who consume the data. Maybe there are some steps we can take to help build the confidence. Bill?
So the challenge with the certifying the consumers is that the vendors who provide the data are not consistent on the methodology that we pull the data from. So we have to do special things for vendor X versus vendor B. So how do you certify it? Because I have to change my logic and my way I pull things because
that was definitely one of the challenges with client certification. The ones that were most successful in the old days were using the metadata to drive their system, so that when a metadata changed and the vendor was doing expand and the other vendor's not doing it, your metadata-driven system was able to pick that up and go, oh, it's this person, I need to use expand to get my media. Oh, it's this person, I need to use the CDN link to get the media. It wasn't simple or trivial programming, and like we've said, it's a challenging problem. And
I don't want to get us down like a metadata rabbit hole. That wasn't really my intention. I use that as a proxy for how well informed are my consumers.
Yes.
And the answer is not.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I managed to answer neither question. Fantastic. Any other questions, comments, pain points that we might be able to do something about?
And at the end of the day, we need to build a reference server, and that takes a lot of resources to have that right. But the intent is not to have a per vendor sort of system. It's to have a simple, this is the standard, these are the protocols. That's the way it works. So, Josh will be reaching out to you if you can help out with those resources.
Yeah, and maybe having, the two types of client samples might be something that's not quite as big a lift. But we definitely would have to fix JavaScript. We'd have to have a JavaScript client if we were going to do that, because more than half the people seem to be focused on that side of the language. Yeah.
I do like the education thought where they've taken a course and they're therefore RESO certified. I mean, I think that would be kind of cool if we could accomplish that.
Are you going back to school, Sergio?
Me?
Yeah.
Why?
To get red tea.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'll be the first, Sam.
Well,
You heard it here
Red
first.
B is informational, but Red T can have tests. It can have, you have to show capabilities. So that's definitely a possibility there.
All right, any other questions, comments, thoughts? Did we miss any pain points that you thought we were going to address this year? We will be building the roadmap for 2025-26 in the next, well, not the next 4 months, but for November-ish timeframe. So we'll be inputting to Josh some thoughts about what we should be working as transport going forward. I think we've spit out a bunch of interesting things for other work groups over the past couple days. So if I'm wrapping this up, I think we had a really successful event, and I don't see any more hands, and I don't feel I need to talk anymore. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks, Sergio. All right, let's turn this back to Sam. Oh, and take my water.
This part's short. Thanks, everybody. You're the hardcores. You're still here for the end of the transport meeting. Great meeting. Thanks, Paul and Sergio. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, you can talk to Suzanne and the team about the next events coming up, but we continue to sell out, so thank you for making that happen. And Frisco, Texas, 6 months from now, looking forward to seeing you there. The little tiny thing in the bottom of all those slides, it's working because you're doing the work and the products are working. So we appreciate the work that you do, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.